I'm Stephanie with the GA Huddle, and I am here with Robert Jacobson, who is the Executive Director of the California Council on Problem Gambling. Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well, and thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm well too. Thank you for being here. Our first question that we wanted to start with is just if you could tell us about a typical day where you are and what made you want to work at the council.
Absolutely. The story of how I came to the council is a little bit unique in that I bring a different perspective than many of my peers in the field. I actually worked in the gaming industry for 15 years. And towards the end of it, one of the job duties that I had was to coordinate property-wide what we termed compliance training. So the trainings that are required by regulation or internal policy, things like that. And I was coordinating property-wide compliance trainings, and one of those was responsible gaming training. And over a period of a couple of years, I got to know the California Council, had a lot of respect, obviously, for the work they were doing, and also for the liaison that we were working with, who had been in the field for many years. And after a couple of years, we were talking about an upcoming opportunity that basically involved coordinating with every casino, about 150 casinos throughout California. So it was something similar to what I was doing on a different scale in a different industry, with the opportunity to have a real impact, to help people, to take 15 years of work and experience that I had built up and take that and go out and leverage that in a unique way to provide some help. And it was appealing. And so I came on board with CCPG back in 2011. About 6 months later, I moved into the executive director position, which I've been doing ever since. Now, the second part of that question, what does a normal day look like? That would be a pretty lengthy interview in its own right. But
Sure.
the the gist of it is that there really is not specifically a normal day. So we are an organization that promotes we promote awareness through education programs, and we work to educate the public about existing treatment and prevention programs, but we work with a variety of other partners throughout the state. What we do is a lot of, you could say, behind the scenes work. So we don't work directly with those who are affected on a day-to-day basis, although we do on occasion. But we have a variety of programs that are intended to either support our partners or, more importantly, to help people who are in need of help find those programs, learn that the programs are available at no cost. That is something that's very important and that we're very proud of. And then to help connect them with the best program for them. And as a result of working with a variety of partners and a variety of programs, there's not a specific what does your day look like, which is actually a great thing.
One of the ways that you are helping people find those programs is the new website, howtoexclude.org. Can you tell us about the creation of that and why that was so necessary?
Absolutely. California, like quite a few other states, probably 20 to 30 other states in the country, has tribal gaming. And the simplest way to understand some of the legal and logistical relationships between tribes and states is to think of each tribe as having the equivalent rights to a state. So essentially, if you were to drive to a Native American casino that was within the borders of your state, then there would be a time where you essentially crossed a border into what was the equivalent of another state. And that tribe may have its own judicial system, its own police force, and it certainly has its own government. So that means that we have somewhere around 110 different governmental agencies located in regions and cities throughout the state. And specifically in terms of tribal gaming, what that means is that there is no single regulatory body which oversees all gaming in California. So we have right now 69 tribal casinos operated by 67 tribes, with a couple of other properties under construction or closed post-pandemic that could still reopen, still have their compacts in place. So let's just say about 70 casinos. That means we have 70 gaming commissions. A gaming commission is the agency that regulates a casino. Now, we also have, post-pandemic, about 75 California gaming establishments, which are basically poker rooms. Sometimes they have some variations of table games. Excuse me. Sometimes they have some variations of table games offered as well, but they're primarily offering poker. Those 75 casinos are under a single regulatory agency because they're licensed by the state of California. So there's a big distinction here when it comes to self-exclusion. And self-exclusion, by the way, is a preventative program that allows a person who finds that they're struggling to control their gambling to go to a casino and say, don't let me come back in. And then the casino will not allow them to play, or if they do manage to sneak back in or go back in unobserved, the casino will not allow them to cash out jackpot winnings. So it's a major incentive not to return. And it's extremely helpful for that individual to be able to just fill out one form to exclude from all of the casinos. And they can do that within California gaming, but they cannot do that in tribal gaming because of that nature of having 70 different governments. All of those governments would have to come together working in a government-to-government relationship, which is a lot of time and paperwork, in order to create a shared program. And then once they did that, they would then need to come together with the state of California and work create another intergovernmental agreement, which again is not a quick or easy or realistic process. So for the past 15 years or so, we've tried a variety of different programs to help make it easier for the individual to self-exclude. The challenge with having all these regulatory agencies doesn't end at just the fact that you can't just simply fill out one form. It extends to the fact that each of those programs may be different. Each tribal casino may have its own program, its own requirements on how you exclude, its own durations for how long you can exclude, its own methodology for how and when that exclusion period ends. And it's extremely confusing for somebody who's in distress and who's in need and struggling with a problem and isn't in the best position to try and disentangle 70 plus sets of governmental regulation. And it's challenging. So while we have been unsuccessful in creating a framework to simplify the exclusion process in terms of being able to exclude from a bunch of casinos at once, we have been able to work with some individual properties to simplify and improve their programs, to do things. One of the most important things is simply being able to exclude without going to the casino itself, being able to mail in a form as opposed to having to drive to a casino, which can be highly triggering. And on top of that, if you have to go take a tour of 150 casinos, that's thousands of dollars in gas, weeks off of work. California is a big state. California is actually bigger. Just the state of California is actually bigger than all of the United Kingdom. And in terms of driving, it's a 19-hour drive with no traffic from southern border to northern alone. So
we don't want to put people in that traffic, and you don't want to put people back in areas they're trying to exclude from. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, with traffic, you reverse it. It's a 91-hour drive from south to north if you know LA traffic. But yeah, it's not realistic. So howtoexclude.org is an idea that was born a couple of years ago. It's our newest, and we're cautiously optimistic that it's our best attempt to simplify things. And the first phase of this website was recently launched, and it's simple. It has information about 98% of the self-exclusion programs in California. Why 98%? Because that information is not publicly available anywhere. Now, it's not secret, but it's just not publicly available. And so to collect that information, we couldn't go on the internet and do research. We had our staff spend literally weeks calling throughout the state. And just as an example, we have trained staff that did this hundreds and hundreds of times and got the rhythm down. And it still took us a couple of 100 hours and a couple of months to collect this information. So imagine an individual trying to collect the information. But I digress there. So there were four properties that we were unable at this time, four properties that we were unable to collect the information on, hence the 98%. They just refused to give us the information over the phone. But it centralizes the information for the vast majority of properties throughout the state. It lets you know which ones you can exclude from by mail. It lets you know which ones that you can drive to a location offsite, like a gaming commission, and not have to go into a casino to exclude from, which departments to contact, things like that. One of the things a user on the site may notice is that it's a little bit onerous to navigate some of the menus. And I will mention that that's actually by design, which seems odd, which is the only reason that I bring it up. We did not want to create a casino directory.
Sure.
So if we created a system where you could just type in your zip code and bring back a list of self-exclusion programs, you've also returned an entire list of casinos near your home, which can have the opposite effect of what we're looking for. And
That's
so we
tricky.
do, unfortunately, yeah. It was a lot of thought and work actually went into trying to figure out that proper balance between providing information that's necessary for those in need and not triggering those who are in. So the navigation is a little bit onerous, but other than that, we believe that the information is all there. It's as simple as we can make it to find the information. It really just requires more individual click. So you can click on your city on a interactive map. You can type in your zip code. You can type in your city. You can find a list of properties within a given radius, 50, 60, 80 miles. You program it in, and you can get the information that will help you exclude. Now that's phase one. Our hope for phase two, and this does not have a set date. We're a small nonprofit trying to work with dozens of government agencies to put this together. But I would love to think that sometime within the next year, we could launch this on a small scale basis. Our hope is that we can act as a neutral, third-party, centralized submission point, which is a lot of big words to basically say that somebody could download one form on our site, upload that form back to us, and we would then send it out to everybody else. And they would accept the form from us and enroll the individual into their own respective self-exclusion programs.
That would certainly make self-exclusion easier.
Yes. Yeah, that's the goal. The largest complexity is because all the programs are different. To accept a single form means those programs have to change and conform. So it'll be a lengthy process, but we're optimistic that this is a much better pathway than trying to create a universal program. And that was the actual reason for creating the site.
And do you believe that self-exclusion programs work so far? And what has been the most effective one in California?
So I do believe they work, or we wouldn't have put this much work into developing this program.
Of course.
Now it has to be taken with a grain of salt. But let me back up and first say that studying self-exclusion is very different. There have only been 2 studies over the past quite a few years that I'm aware of, and one of them really did not study efficacy, and the other wasn't able to get that many people to participate. So there's a lot that we don't know about self-exclusion, and a lack of funding and challenges that are involved with people wanting to participate both play a role in why we don't. So things that we don't know are, what is the best duration of self-exclusion? Standard is 1 year, but there are casinos or states that offer 3-year, 5-year, 10-year periods. We don't actually know if that's better, worse, the same. I think that common sense based on some behavioral health principles would tell us that anything under 6 months to a year is likely to be less effective. But as far as beyond that, there's a lot to be discovered. We don't know that it works for everybody or how well it works for any one individual. We don't know exactly how well it works if you try to use it as your only method of getting help. But then there are things that we do know. We know that it is an incredible, what I like to call a relapse prevention tool. So if somebody has entered into treatment and is entering into recovery and getting help, but has that night where they can't sleep and at 3 a.m. they've got the itch, knowing that they're self-excluded could be all the difference between driving to the property and completely relapsing, or getting through that difficult night and getting to the next day and continuing with their recovery. We know that it is a powerful deterrent for some people, and it's less of a deterrent for others. Why it works better for some than others, we don't know, but we know that it works well for some. So while there's a lot that we don't know, there's enough that we do know that says that it's a valuable tool that makes it worth continuing to do this.
And what other tools or programs are available to people who are or may become problem gamblers in the state of California?
Well, we're fortunate to have quite a few services and programs available for free. And I generally hesitate to say free because there's this association with free, that free is just bad or a scam or a gimmick. So we typically will say no cost, because what these programs actually are no cost to the client, but they are paid for through programs run by the state of California. And those programs are actually funded by the gaming industry through funds that are mandated by law or regulation. So when a casino gets licensed, depending on the type of casino and the size of the casino, they'll be obligated to contribute a certain amount of money to offset gambling disorder within the community and the state. That funding goes to a state office of problem gambling, which then goes out and funds a variety of programs. One of the best things about these programs is that you can enter into them completely anonymously. So if you enter into treatment, your name does not get sent back to the Office of Problem Gambling. You stay one-on-one with your therapist, and the therapist just bills the state as if you're an unknown patient, and the state is your insurance provider. Now, to the programs themselves that are offered under this CalGETS, California Gambling Education and Treatment Services Program, we have that one-on-one therapy that I mentioned that is available in person. We have over 150 providers throughout the state. It's also possible to do it through telehealth, so by Zoom, like you and I are meeting right now. Or we have a different program called Call to Change, where if you're not able to travel and for whatever reason you don't want to or can't participate in a telehealth session, you can actually do it over the telephone with a master's level counselor. We have group treatment available, that all of the groups are hosted or led or provided by therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists, licensed clinical social workers, but people who have had extensive schooling and training within the field. We have, for more people suffering from more severe disorders, we have intensive outpatient programs, which is typically 4 hours a day, 3 days a week for a month or longer, available currently in San Diego and Los Angeles. And then there is a sports betting, and I know there's a question coming later, which sports betting is not legal in California. That doesn't mean that people don't find their way to participate, especially when Vegas is a 4-hour drive from 25 million residents in California. So there is a sports betting treatment facility in Northern California. There is an inpatient facility in Los Angeles, and all of those programs are available at no cost. To find which program would work best for you or which provider is closest to you, everything in California starts with the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. And I would love it if one of the editors could flash that on screen here. So it's 1-800-426-2537. And when you call into the helpline, there's in-language services available in English, Spanish, and Chinese. There's translation services available in 200 other languages, plus TTY for the deaf and hard of hearing. You'll speak with a master's level or above counselor who will assess through they'll take you through just a natural conversation like you and I are having now. And they'll use that conversation to assess where you're at. Are you ready to get help? Are you just thinking about getting help? Are you already getting help but you need more? And they'll use that to help you find the program that is most suitable for you. They'll provide you with contact information for the provider that is most suitable for you or providers. They can also make referrals into programs that are usually available at no cost, but not covered under our CalGets umbrella, such as participating in a 12-step group like GA. Couple of last notes on the helpline. We do accept text conversations by texting the word support to the number 53342. You can also visit 800gambler.chat and chat with a counselor. We offer a motivational text messaging program called Encourage Me, where, again, based on that evaluation of where you are personally, you'll receive 2 text messages a week for up to, for 12 weeks, personalized based on your own needs. And then maybe the most important thing out of all of this, every one of these services that I've mentioned, starting with the helpline, going through treatment, they're all available to anybody who meets just 1 out of the 9 clinical criteria for gambling disorder. There's no income requirement, there's no insurance requirement, and they are available also at no cost for anybody who has been affected by someone else's gambling.
So we've talked about what kind of programs are available for problem gamblers, but are there any preventative measures? Are there any education programs for people who may have not reached problem status yet, or for young people in California?
So there are, in terms of preventative programs, there are a lot of efforts that go into this. We have a large community outreach program. We will go out to community health fairs or to events that are intended to serve populations which are at a higher risk for developing a problem, often underserved populations, provide information and answer questions. There are other partner organizations that do something similar. There's obviously a large statewide marketing campaign, radio and print, billboards and digital signage as well. Casinos will have a baseline of regulation on what they're required to post throughout the casino and the amount of information that they make accessible to guests, things like having brochures at cashiers' windows or having the helpline number posted on ATM machines, things like that. Now, beyond that, there are also some casinos that will choose to go a little bit further, and they may have signage placed in more locations, or they may have dedicated staff that receive enhanced training that allow them to speak with guests in need in a more detailed level, or to help those guests connect with the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. Now, in terms of youth programs, it's tricky because gambling is only legal at 18 and over in California. So there are preventative programs, but there's a limitation in what we can do because you can't educate youth at the point at where they're gambling. And you notice I didn't say that they're not gambling. I just said that we can't educate them at the point where they are. We know that youth gamble sometimes at rates of up to twice as frequently as adults. But most of the time, those are going to be gambling among friends, gambling behind the school, playing dice. They're not easy locations for us to get to. So there is an organization in California called Friday Night Live. It's actually a group of organizations. So it's the Friday Night Live Partnership. It's a group of organizations that work together for a variety of youth programs. And one of those programs is called BOOF, or Betting on Our Future. It's an after-school program. I want to say it's 8 weeks, but we're not directly involved with it, so might be a little bit longer than that. But it's an after-school program where FNL, Friday Night Live, will go in and train staff at the school to educate the young people who join the club about problem gambling, about the impacts it can have on their family, about the risks that it can have to them directly. Then those young people will create PSAs, public service announcements. They'll do both video and radio. There's an extensive, for anybody watching the video, for anybody watching this video who would be interested in seeing some of the PSAs created by young people, go onto YouTube and search for California Friday Night Live Partnership. There's over 1,000 videos on there, and some of them are just astoundingly good. Some of the best, many of the best, period, PSAs that I've seen in our field were actually created out of this program by students in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade. It's
Wow.
an amazing program.
And as far as getting to organizations and making sure that responsible gaming is occurring, that sounds like a more challenging environment. But there are some approved responsible gaming casinos and properties. What goes into the process of approving a property and naming it responsible?
So the process for approving a property as a responsible gaming establishment is actually a lengthy one. Typically, it's a several month process. And what it boils down to is we're checking to ensure that the property is not just meeting, but exceeding regulatory and legislate legal requirements, but also that they're enacting industry standard best practices. So this would include things such as making sure that all of their staff is trained on an annual basis, making sure that that training goes or that training includes all of the current help and prevention programs in California, as well as the best ways to approach somebody who's in need or the best ways to respond to somebody who is reaching out for help. We make sure that those properties have a small dedicated team of ambassadors who will be typically employees who have the ability to float or to move anywhere around the property. They're not in a dedicated area and have a lot of experience working with the most sensitive customer service situations. And that team will be the ones who will be able to take a guest in need somewhere private, which is really important, and give them information about the help and prevention services in California. These properties would be demonstrating to us that they're operating at a higher standard when it comes to their marketing and advertising, both on property and off. As one example, it's incredibly difficult to legislate how much space must be allocated for the helpline number on an advertisement. So if you were to say, let's say minimum 12-point font, what happens if they're giving away a pen? Then there would be no room for anything else. But if you don't say 12-point font, what happens if they put 4-point font on a roadside billboard?
That's a good
It
point.
just looks like a dirt speck. Yeah. So it's a really complicated topic. It doesn't seem like it until you sit down and try and figure it out. There are some things you can do that just says like clearly visible to people with standard eyesight. But generally speaking, a responsible gaming establishment is somebody that's not putting 4-point font on a roadside billboard. There's somebody that's working at an industry best practices standard to get the message out to the guests that are in need. And that includes signage placed throughout the property in visible locations. It includes not just necessarily using the minimum number of words legislated, more extensive training for their team, and so forth. So the overall process for us, from training through property walkthroughs, through evaluating policies and procedures, it's a several-month process.
Okay. And we touched on this earlier. We brought up sports betting. It's not currently legal in California, but do you think that it has the chance to be legalized in California in the upcoming year or two for the 2024 or 2025 ballot?
I mean, anything's possible. Our organization is what we would refer to as gambling neutral. So we don't have an opinion on whether or not gambling should or should not be legal, should or should not expand. And so I tread carefully here in that I don't really have an opinion on whether or not a bill should or should not pass. I will say that there were 2 bills that were resoundingly voted down last year, like by numbers that were not expected by many. There were questions about if those bills were the bills that would if those bills were voted down specifically because they were sports betting or specifically because of the marketing campaigns that surrounded them and some of the other components of those bills. So it's difficult to know if that was a referendum on sports betting or a referendum on the bills or a little bit of both. But I will say that the bar for legalizing sports betting in California is higher than in many other states because it requires a constitutional amendment. So it doesn't just require a simple majority, it requires a supermajority to pass at the ballot. And we were a very, very long way away from a supermajority in the last vote. So it's possible, anything could happen, but it's unlikely that it's going to legalize in the near that it's going to be legalized in the near future. And I would add, even if it did pass a ballot vote, the process for actually enacting the industry is likely going to be anywhere from 12 to 30 months and probably closer to 30 than 12 because we would have to write regulations, go through a public rulemaking process, pass those regulations. Then we would have to license industries or license companies to come in. And then those companies would have to build their platforms. Now, in many cases, the ones being licensed will already have platforms in other states. So that part's a faster process. But first building the regulation, then issuing the licenses, that's going to take a very long time. So even if it were to be legalized in 2024, it would be shocking at that point to see the first sports bet placed before 2026.
That's true. There's a big time and regulatory difference between legal and live. Our last question for today is about the running of the California Council on Problem Gambling. And that's about how the program's mostly funded by donations. And we've got significant contributors to the program of Aristocrat, DraftKings, and the Cow Lottery. Can you tell us about how the donations work and any relationships with those people and partners?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a fair question. So first I would mention that we're actually about 70% of our funding comes through contracts that we have to provide the helpline and some of the training programs that I mentioned. About 30% of our budget comes from private contributions. And the majority of those contributions do come from the gaming industry. So sometimes that can be, it can be eye-raising for somebody from outside looking in. And the best answer I can give you is that we work in an industry where we're trying to provide help to people who are struggling through financial hardship as a result of their gambling and are very rarely in a position to make significant contributions. Conversely, there is a lot of social and sometimes regulatory or environmental pressure on casinos to try and offset some of the harms that can result from gambling problems that are developed as a result of legalized gambling. So there is actually a logical cause and effect in the fact that pretty much every organization that works in the problem gambling field that I can think of nationwide will have a majority of their private contributions coming from the gaming industry because gambling disorder is something that's not really widely known. So an example I like to give a lot, people in my generation or the generations prior to mine, possibly a generation or two in front of mine. So basically, if you're at least 30 years old, you probably grew up watching commercials that said, this is your brain on drugs. One of the most famous social awareness campaigns of all time.
I remember those.
We went through decades. Yes. We went through decades of being educated that if you're an alcoholic, you're not a degenerate. You're someone suffering from a serious disease, which is treatable, but won't get better if it's not treated. That took, as a country, it took us 3 decades to really understand that. We went through the same education process with drugs and with a variety of other addictions. Gambling really only became part of our culture around the early 2000s. And we have never had that public awareness campaign, and we've never had the funding for that public awareness campaign. So there remains a stigma around gambling disorder. And I've said disorder because it's the clinical term, but it's an addiction. There's a stigma around gambling addiction that has not been dispelled. and that there currently is not enough money to go out and do a 3-decade nationwide, this is your brain on gambling public awareness campaign on. And as a result, what you would find is that a lot of nonprofits working in the problem gambling industry are a little bit niche when looking for private contributions outside of the problem gambling industry, because there's not yet enough awareness about the severity of the disorder. And to put it into context, I've tried to avoid giving too many statistics in this interview, but I think this one's important. Nationally, what we call substance use disorder, which is drug and alcohol addiction, is 3.8 times as prevalent, or happens to 3.8 times as many people as those who suffer from a gambling addiction. So for every one gambling addict, there's just under 4 people suffering from drug and alcohol addiction. Nationally, the funding for substance use disorder is 381 times greater than the funding for gambling disorder. So if you just divide those two numbers, it's actually very easy division. There's 100 times more funding per person, $100 for every person with a substance use disorder as there is for a person with a gambling disorder. And what that boils down to is you'll find that there are not a lot of natural partnerships in our field. I would love it if we continued with the same contributions that we have, but instead of that being 30% of our budget, it was 5%. And there were other related stakeholders who were also contributing. But as far as our relationship with our contributors, we obviously acknowledge anybody who contributes to us, but it doesn't actually impact any of our programs. So we're a 501c3 membership-based organization. So contributions are actually considered memberships. Well, there's two. You can either purchase a membership or make a private contribution to us. And we sincerely appreciate any contributions that we receive of any size. If it is a purchase membership, then the person who purchases that membership receives voting rights in accordance with nonprofit law, which means they have one vote among all members. But beyond that, there's not a major relationship with any individual contributor in terms of how it impacts our day-to-day operations.
Well, we hope that the council continues to receive the funding that it needs and that the programs that you're working on are effective and even surpass what you are hoping for them to do.
Well, I very much appreciate that. And that'd be it. We very much appreciate that. And we thank you very much for your time and for the opportunity to get our message out.
Thank you for speaking with us today as well. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.